Hello and welcome. You are listening to Moodally Matters, the podcast that recognizes that your mood matters. Every episode, we talk to a range of amazing guests with experience in some of the top organizations in the world, discussing work life at the crossroads of mood, well-being, and performance. Together, we aim to create better workplaces, one mood at a time. Let's get started with your host, Moodally founder, Erica First.
Hello and welcome. I am Erica First, your host of Moodally Matters. My guest today is product designer Michelle Ang, who after a terrible health scare decided it was time for her to get serious about her professional boundaries. Today, she shares her experience and her precious and hard-earned wisdom about where to draw the line for your own well-being. And now on to the episode. Michelle, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Why don't you, could you please introduce yourself and tell people who you are, what you do, just a little introduction.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Michelle. I live in New York, and professionally, I am a product designer. So I design websites and apps. And I also run a nonprofit, and I am building a femtech startup.
Oh, nice. Amazing. And actually talking about that, can you share with us a little bit about your career journey, where you started and how you ended up where you are today?
Yeah, of course. What is really interesting about, your show is because you talk a lot about stress. And I would say I started my career in a very stressful environment back in 2007. As we all know, the recession really hit in 2008, but I was really lucky to, I was studying in Boston at the time, and I was really lucky to get a job in Wall Street as a software engineer in 2007. So right before the recession hit. And it was a very scary time for, I think, a lot of us, especially for someone who newly graduated, because I remember seeing layoffs left and right, and people were there was just this huge amount of uncertainty and people just afraid of losing their jobs. And so I grew up in the environment. My first job, as you know, financial industry, it's, usually people work really long hours, but at that time people work like extra. And I remember really not knowing the boundary because everyone just works through midnight. I remember working, 2 a.m., 4 a.m., weekends. I remember working like the whole day until the next day, like afternoon. Like it's just normal because everybody working so much. And so that was how I started my career. And I feel
trial by fire.
I know. And I also feel really bad for this generation now, because we are, in this uncertain time, and I'm sure a lot of them also feel the same way. So that's how I started my career. And then it was very interesting. Similar to you, I had a health issue. I was diagnosed with cancer. And so I decided that, I just wanted to do something I really love. And so I decided to quit my job as a software engineer and become a product designer.
That's, I'm sorry that finding your path had to come through such a difficult challenge, but that's, all's well that ends well, I suppose.
Yeah.
And so do you work freelance as a product designer? You have your own company. How are you set up?
Yeah, so I have my own company, basically a one-woman shop. I work a lot with small businesses, startup companies, and also nonprofits. So that's how I really prefer smaller companies, because I enjoy helping, them succeed against the big guys, so to speak. And I'm industry agnostic, but I do prefer mission-driven companies.
Okay, which actually is a perfect segue to my next
question, which is what is your personal and professional mission?
Yeah. So I think, I made a choice very early on, and I think it wasn't very, so let me step back. So when you're younger, they always ask you like, what do you want to be? Especially at your first job, they're like, where do you see your career path going? And all I could say at that time was I didn't want to be like my managers who work, like 24/7 at a job that they might not necessarily enjoy. And so I think really early on, I decided to focus on only working on things that I like, and I think that could make a positive impact for society. And so I would say, personally, I definitely think that it's important to, like your family structure, right? Like taking care of your family, not putting your job first. And I see a lot of people, they might work long hours, late night. They might miss their family, like gathering and stuff like that. I do that sometimes, but I wanted to make a very conscious decision that I'm not going to, damage my like personal relationships because of my work. I think, I want to protect that. And I think in terms of professionally, I pick, like I mentioned, I pick small companies or companies with mission, and I run a nonprofit, and my nonprofit basically help people, college students in New York City who are what we call under-resourced, and really help them get that first job that they, wanted, because, we call them like under-resourced because they're usually like immigrant family, or they're the first one who are going to college, or like they're the first one who are aiming for like a white collar job, and they really don't know how to get there. And so I think that's my mission, is just really try to make impact, with my work, while not sacrifice my personal life. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's it's very important. It's a really profound and important mission that you have, especially the work that you're doing with your nonprofit. So I'm sure thank you on behalf of them, but also it's just a really inspiring thing that you're doing. So, and you've kind of hinted at this in what you've said before, but more explicitly, what does well-being mean to you?
Yeah, I think well-being can mean a lot of things, but I think essentially you have a good enough, a well-balanced life, but also a good enough mechanism, a defense mechanism that would help you through bad times. So that's what well-being means, like, and it's, because a lot of times, in the modern world, we have a lot of stress, and I'm sure as, a business owner, you feel it, very deeply, like myself as well. Just a lot of uncertainties. And so I think having different tools in your toolbox, or at least kind of know when things are maybe out of balance in your mind, and that you need to reset yourself, or like having different skills to help rebalance your mind and body. I think that's really important. Yes, I know it's a little bit vague, but I think in general, it's just like, take breaks, eat well, exercise, talk with friends and families. I'm not saying I do them well, but like, I think now I'm at the age where I'm cognizant that like, these are the things that I need to do.
you mentioned having the skills to be able to balance yourself mentally and also professionally. And so let's turn over to the skill that you are bringing us today, which is talking about professional boundaries. Okay. And what do professional boundaries look like?
I think that professional boundary, it's centered around, I think first of all, centered around you, like it's your personal value, something that you would not compromise, no matter what. It doesn't matter, you might potentially make other people unhappy, but you have enough self-worth that you are able to communicate to the other people that, hey, this is my limit. Whether if it is somebody comes to you at 6 p.m., on a Friday, be like, hey, I need something like by Monday, like 9 a.m., like being able to push back and be like, hey, like I know that this is really important to you, but, I have a family, etc. So I think being able to push back, that's really important. But I think being able to set a really good boundary, it really requires yourself as a center. And so if you don't have a really clear idea of, if you don't like love yourself, or if you don't have a very strong self-confidence that, you're worth it, you're worth being able to rest, you're worth being not being asked to do like outrageous and ridiculous things just to satisfy other people, etc. So that would be my definition.
Okay, so then we can say sort of the first step in developing professional boundaries are having a clear idea on what yours are.
Yes, I would say so.
So you have to sort of establish in your own mind and or even literally with a list, what is important to you. Like, I will never cut time out of this, or I will always be home at this time, or, one of my things was always when people would put meetings in my agenda without asking me.
Yeah.
So I was like, my time, I get to decide how I want to spend it,
Yes.
So if you'd like me to come, please send me an email or call me and let me know what it's about. And then let's see, A, if we can solve it on the phone, or B, if it's worth a meeting. So, to each person, I think it looks different. But to know like what your, I don't want to say pet peeve, but what is valuable to you? What are some of the other, you think, sort of professional boundaries that we can see that someone might set up?
Yeah, actually, if we can go back to the calendar thing a little bit, because I think, like you mentioned before, routine is very important for us because things just change a lot as entrepreneurs. I think calendar is very interesting. And so what I do is I actually only have certain days of the week or certain time of the days to take in meetings. And then everything else would be like my my time to think and my time to work. I think, and I would call that like boundaries. Like this is like my time, and otherwise, like anybody can book whatever time they want. So I think like going back, just know your boundary is really important. For example, I know that I work better, in the afternoon. So like I'll schedule most of the meetings in the morning. I have my time. So knowing really what works well for you is important. So that's the note I wanted to add regarding calendar. I think regarding other like professional boundary, like we talk about, just knowing where you stand. And I think that, there are times, and when I reach out to you, I talk a little bit about what companies could also do. And I want to kind of blend it a little bit. So I think a lot of times nowadays, it's very interesting with our economy where you hear that a lot in the news, companies complain about the new generation. They want to have a normal life and they will shame them, right? And, quiet quitting, I think that's the term.
Yes.
I mean, that's basically them pushing boundary, right? Like they're like, once we hire you, we want you to work 24/7 and you devote your life to the company and you should not have your personal, like have side interest. I think companies could definitely do a better job because like people are not stupid, with this economy. You can see companies firing people, like laying off just to meet some numbers while posting really good profit number. Why would people, this is not 30, 40, 50 years ago where, our parents or grandparents would work for a company their entire life because we know that there's no longer this kind of job security. They're willing to sacrifice people just to meet numbers and just to make themselves look good in front of like their board and stockholders. And so I think it's really important for people to, in order to protect themselves, it's to upskill them in other areas, and to have multiple things. Even if you have a 9 to 6 job, just be like, is there anything else I could do right now, even if it doesn't make money, that could potentially lead me to have another income that, I won't be afraid if I get laid off. So I think that would be like, for example, my nonprofit right now, actually, like, we're not making money. We actually, luckily I have 2 co-founders and we really believe in this mission. So we, devote our time and energy every weekend. More than that, we meet our mentees every weekend, but we spend our time planning. I'm not doing it because, for example, I think this nonprofit will make money, but then it also, not just financially, but also mentally, I have something else. Like I'm attaching my worth, not just to my job, but I'm attaching my worth to what I can bring to society, if that makes sense. So I do this nonprofit. And then also on the side, that's actually why I started my own company. Because I didn't want, after, I started my career in this really hostile environment where I remember my boss was just gone one day, like in 2008. Like I was just working. My boss went for lunch. His jacket was there. He never came back.
It's freaky.
It's freaky. His stuff was there for 3 months.
So we're in Europe. I'm in Europe, and stories like that can't really happen here. It's a phenomenon that's distinctly American. And when people in Europe hear about it, they're like, "What?" Like, we, on the flip side, in some cases, it's impossible to get rid of an employee, even if they're underperforming, they don't show up. So there has to be a happy medium somewhere. I think
there has to be a happy medium. I agree. But yeah, so I really do believe that you just have to, even if you have a 9 to 6, freelance on the side, do consulting work, expand your network so that if you get laid off, you can call up your ex-colleague, your friends, etc. to get another job. Go to networking events, just meet other people. Pick up new skills, like always be on the look. I'm in technology, so that's like something natural that we have to do just to make sure we don't stay behind, but like just be really aware of new things in your industry and become that expert, even if you're not even if you're like not like, for example, a Twitter, influencer for your industry, for example, at least you should be really aware of the landscape and maybe try to become a speaker at a conference, etc. Just like get yourself out there, get yourself known. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I think if I'm sort of like, and I've been taking notes, as I said, it's very much about maintaining a respectful distance from the company. Like the company is not going to show you loyalty. So you have to take, it's kind of like every man for themselves. So don't rely on your company to provide you the skills that you need. You may have to go out and get them yourself. And if they'll get rid of you in a moment's notice, then, you need to be ready to hit the market or do something else. But also to have something that is yours. Like you said, you started the nonprofit to do it for yourself. So to make sure it doesn't have to be necessarily a side hustle. It can also just be a hobby or a passion or something, but that where you are feeding personal passions and desires, for accomplishments in realms that don't have to do with your company, so that you can keep, where your energy goes a little bit more balanced.
Yes.
One of the things that we talked about before was like saying no in the office. Now, obviously, if you are an entrepreneur, you are able to manage your calendar and say, I'm only going to take meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays. When we're in a professional environment, like financial services or like, your early job, where there really is, and I think it would be hard for any company to deny it, the people who overachieve, the people who do more are obviously preferred. But so in an organization where obviously overachieving is preferred, and as we've seen with the quiet quitting phenomenon, the baseline, right? You are expected to do above and beyond. How do you say no without risking your job or without risking being seen as a quiet quitter?
I think there are two things. One thing is you always want to back things by reasons, right? For example, I actually ran into that issue in my previous job where, I was dealing with a lot of health issues. I actually had 2 surgeries like within a year, and I just physically unable to and mentally unable to go really above and beyond of, what they're asking of me. And so I think number one is if you do have this kind of issues, just be really transparent and open with your supervisors that, hey, I would love to do that, but, I need the time to heal. And if they're not supportive, then maybe that's not the workplace. And so again, it really comes down to whether you're willing to, number one, you set your boundary, you give your reasoning, and you try to work with your employers. And if it doesn't work out, you just have to be really comfortable to walk away. You need to know your bottom line, basically. And another thing that I wanted to say is, it's interesting, of course, like people who do more get promoted faster and etc. That's completely normal. But I remember one of my my favorite manager of all time, and he told me that he got a piece of advice from his manager that, if people always see you working, like if they always see you working all the time, even if you produce great amount of work, they will be like, why is that person working all the time? It doesn't actually give a good impression to people that they will actually question like, oh, is it because that they need more time in order to complete the task, even though you go above and beyond, but people would be like, oh my God, like this person write an email 2 a.m. in the morning, 4 a.m. in the morning. Actually people who on the receiving end, they might actually feel stressed out. They're like, oh my God, like, do I have to compete with that? It actually makes people feel uncomfortable. So I think that especially if you become a manager and you work, extra long hours, you put a lot of pressure on your subordinates. And so I actually think people need to set a really good example, if that makes sense. Like, going above and beyond is great, but you need to show that you are capable. And I think nowadays, maybe because of COVID, it makes it a lot more tolerable for people to actually have a life, because in Zoom, you get to see like their family members like behind and like stuff like that. And so like everybody kind of feel the other person's more of a human than before, versus before COVID, you only see them at work and you don't know what happens to them in their family.
Right.
Yeah.
The black hole.
Yes, the black hole. Exactly. So yeah, I actually think that it's good to set an example. Like, be like, I'm actually a human being. And maybe, I don't know, I'm assuming European might be doing a better job at this, where I'm just a guess, like maybe they have a better like work-life balance, and like there's a term, right? Do you work to live or live to work? I feel like Americans are more like live to work. Europeans are more like work to live. And so I think that has to be a balance.
And so the first thing I wanted to mention is I saw in someone's email the other day that they're like, I work, my best hours for working for me are midnight, or like late at night, but please don't feel obligated to respond to this. Like, do it in the time that's comfortable for you.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was a really nice way of saying, like, I'm doing what's right for me, but that it's not meant to put pressure. Like, if you get this at 1 o'clock in the morning, you don't have to respond. Like, respond when it's comfortable for you. And I thought that was a really nice, like, talking about boundaries. That's a way it's like, I'm respecting my working hours, which are these, but at the same time, I respect that yours maybe look different. And so don't feel that pressure.
Yes.
And going back to what you said about the managers, so it does definitely depend, the ability to enact those boundaries does depend on the manager that you have. But do you think it's something that you can stipulate already in the interview process? Like, you can start to say, like, these are my hard no's or my boundaries. I won't work this. I won't work that. Or do you think that puts you at risk of getting a job?
I think that's very interesting. I think it's interesting to bring up in the interview. I would probably personally, if it were me, I probably only do it later in the process, probably not in the very beginning, because at the beginning I wouldn't want them. I think if I say in the very early beginning, they might perceive it as that I care more about my personal. Then, I mean, obviously they hire me to do something for them, for the company. So they might perceive that as I'm putting my like personal preferences before, them, even before getting to know them. So I think I'll probably do it, if I were me, I'll do it really later in the stage, like maybe even when they give a verbal offer, be like, hey, by the way, these are my hard no's because I have like family situation, X, Y, Z. But I think it would be good to bring it up at some point, before getting hired, because then it will be kind of a shock. It could be a shock to employers. And
it's also, I think you can, so maybe instead of going about saying like, these are my hard no's, you can ask the questions like, how do you, if someone has to leave early, what's the approach? Or if they, if they have a constant 6 o'clock out, like how would that be handled? To kind of see what their responses are.
Yeah, no, that is actually a really good point, because I do remember sometimes asking questions definitely a great way. Because I did remember some companies, and you would find that out about the company culture. Like, some companies would be, the interviewer would be like really straight up, like, yeah, we have really great work-life balance here. Like, nobody work past 6 p.m. and we get like summer Fridays and things like that. Or I came across companies where they just, I told them that I have, I run a nonprofit on the side, and they'll actually become very concerned. They're like, oh, we want our employees to be dedicated 100% to this company, and we don't want our employees to have anything on the side. I mean, that's a red flag.
Yeah. And I think that's actually like in my generation, I don't think it was very, you were considered lucky. Like the company was picking you. And there's definitely been a power dynamic shift in the last few years, which is getting more and more pronounced as more of the Gen Z moves into the workforce. Where now it's like, okay, well, I'm also interviewing you right back. It's like you see if I'm a good fit for you, but let's see if you're a good fit for me.
Exactly.
And the interview process is the best place to discover that. So if you have specific things that you need that are values to you, like what's the process for promotion? Is there a career path? Like, how do you handle job development? How do you handle people leaving early? Things like that. To not be afraid to ask those questions during the interview process, so you have a very good idea of what kind of culture you're walking into.
Yes, it's very important.
So how do you think, what's the risk? Let's talk about the risk. If you don't have boundaries, what happens?
Burnout. Complete burnout. I mean, burnout would be what I call, what would be not the best thing that you could have. I mean, that's not the right way, but like, honestly, like people could get divorced. Like your personal relationship can break down. I mean, family could break apart. You might miss, like your parents, something wrong health-wise, and you might miss seeing them for the last time. Like there's a lot of consequences if you can't say no, and you don't practice it. And sometimes things like, how do I say, things like relationship that tend to break apart over time. You might think that, oh, it's okay if I do it once, do it twice, but then you never know on the other side what, your own family feel. And like one day it just suddenly hit you that, holy shit, like what happened?
Yeah.
So I think, burnout would be, like the one thing, and the other end would be just, your entire life just fall apart. It sounds kind of scary.
No, but I mean, it's right. It's a misconception that we have two buckets, the personal life and the professional life, because obviously they influence each other.
Yes.
If we're having a hard time at home, we come into the office and we might be more difficult, and vice versa.
For sure. I think it's hard. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, nobody wants to say no to the other person. Nobody wants to be someone who make the other person feel uncomfortable, or be seen as somebody who's I don't know, not, unhelpful, or, you're not willing to go above and beyond. But I think sometimes I actually do respect people who have strong boundaries. Even if they say no to me, I'm like, oh, like I see where you're coming from. You have a very, what you want, what you want to protect, and this is your bottom line. Yeah, let me work with that. I think people do appreciate it.
And it's, of course, obviously no one likes to hear the word no. We are, and I actually just wrote an article on this about how shifting your relationship with the word no can actually change how you experience each day. Because as children, obviously, we're trained from the first moments that we start reaching out to do things, we did no, 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 no. So it means something bad. We've done something bad. We've made a mistake, or we're doing something that we don't, and so our brains are wired to not to want to avoid a no at all costs, both in having to say it because you feel guilty for saying it, because what you're doing is telling the other person that they're bad if you have to say no, or you're being difficult in some way. And we don't like hearing it, because then obviously that means that we've done something wrong. And we feel bad about ourselves. And really, so it's about sort of taking out the emotional baggage that's around the word no, and understanding that it is a very simple expression of your rights, right?
Yes.
Like, I don't want to do this. Thank you so much for asking me. But this really isn't an appropriate time for me. I'm sorry if that's inconvenient, but that, you don't have to say no in a mean way, but that there are ways to say, I'm sorry, because we teach other people how we want to be treated. And part of that is in saying no, because then when you say yes too many times, you start to hate the other person, or you start to hate the other entity, because you feel like they're not respecting you, but it's really you who haven't delineated the parameters of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable.
Yeah. That's so interesting. It's interesting. And you used the example of children, like us being little. And when we hear no, it's usually from like an authoritative figure, like parents, grandparents, and stuff like that. Like, I'm very curious, in your research, is there, when it comes from like someone who's like superior, for example, is it harder to say no? I would imagine, right? It's probably harder to say no.
Absolutely, because there's always power dynamics. And so when you feel that you have less power, it feels like a big challenge to say, like talking back to your parents, right?
Exactly.
Like you don't have the right to. And so that's one of the first shifts that you brought up earlier on, is that the company is not loyal to you. Don't put yourself in that position either. Like, don't be like, oh no, they're going to take care of me, because 9 out of 10, the truth is no. If they have to make cuts, they will. And you have to just kind of like keep your fingers crossed that you're not one of them.
It's also interesting because, there are two things that are interesting. I think one thing is, it's not about, I'm going to give an example that's not like really work related, but, in my nonprofit, I mentioned, we help under-resourced college students. And a lot of them come from family background where they need a lot of help financially, and also help just, our kids being there. And so a lot of times, we actually, part of what we're trying to do is to teach them boundaries. Like, you can't skip a session because, if you have to, sure, but like, but try to avoid it. But like, you need to do this for yourself. Even if you say no to your parent because you need to babysit your, baby brother or sister, but like, you're coming to us in this program to upskill yourself in order for you to have a better future, maybe like even for your family. You need to be able to say no to that in order for you to have a better future. So like, we try to teach them that. And also the other thing that we try, and, we'll see how it turns out, it's this, we have a lot of immigrants, and that's a different culture expectations, so to speak. Poor family come from Asian countries. A lot of time family came here, they're like, you can either be a doctor, lawyer, engineers.
Here are your options.
Here are your options, exactly. And so we actually come across students who told us, they are studying this engineering degree because their parents want them to make a lot of money when they graduate. And so even teaching them, hey, you come to America now, you can have a choice. If you don't want to be an engineer, you do not have to be an engineer, even if you make your parents angry.
Right.
Just teaching them to say no to that, or even having a voice to not a voice, but like even have the space to dream. Because I think a lot of times they're just so blinded. They're like, okay, being put in a box, I have to do this. But like, just like freeing them, be like, hey, actually, you can choose. You can have your own self.
Yeah.
Yourself is not to dedicate to become the breadwinner for your family.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, you don't have to live on autopilot. You can construct your reality.
Yeah, exactly. And then another thing that I thought it was interesting, you mentioned when things, back in the days, it was very the power dynamic is different. I wonder if it's because nowadays there are more. I'm just kind of curious do you think it's because there are more women in the workforce and like it's not that traditional back in the days, like, hey, men will work and women will stay in the household, where now we have both. Men and women will go work and then like they all have to take care of their household ability. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's gender based. This is obviously just instinctive. I don't have any data that would speak to it. But there is definitely a tendency in culture to, as with every generation before us, the generation after writes their own rules. And so the generations that are coming in now have different rules for gender identity, for how they want to work and what they want to do. I know several people who are considered Gen Z who studied for a very specific line of work. And they went into that line of work and it was one of those, you're going to have to, do grunt work for the next 15 years. And then maybe eventually you'll hit middle management. And they wanted to do something. So they completely were willing to walk away from what they thought was their career to find what was meaningful to them. And I think that is the fact that people are opting out of the system and rewriting it. And I actually think tech is the reason that most of this happened, because the idea that you could be 20 years old and already running your own company, just completely rewrites everything that we've known historically. So I see that tech, where tech came in and kind of blew up how business ran. And not only that, but like better if you're leaner, better if you're faster, better, if you're more agile, so that you can adapt, changed the way everything we knew about working processes. And then eventually it just sort of bled out into the larger companies where now if you want the good talent, they're like, well, back in tech, I had this, I had this, I had this, I had this. And if you want me, then here's my list of needs. Do you meet that? And so it's becoming that the employee almost in certain cases gets to dictate the terms. So, and I think that's new. Okay, Michelle, thank you so much for your time. Please tell us how people can get in touch with you if they wanted to learn more about your nonprofit, but also about your business.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much, Erica. So my nonprofit is called Project Alpaca. You will see a rainbow color alpaca logo. That's us. So you can reach us at projectalpaca.org. And my design business is at himichelleing.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being here. This was a really interesting conversation.
Yes. Thank you so much, Erica. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Moodally Matters. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort, and we'll catch you in the next episode of Moodally Matters.